Welcome back. What we're going to do, in this video, we're going to do the second of the 3 videos that I talked about dealing with blueprints. And what we're going to do with this one is we're going to create a light that is turned on and off when the player comes within close proximity. And it works kind of like this. If the player runs up to the light there on the wall, the light turns on. You back away from it, it turns off. Go back to it, it turns on. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to add some additional functionality. Once we kind of get the light to work, then we're going to go back and we're going to add a switch into it, similar to what we did with the door, where you have to hit the E key in order for the light to go on and go off. And then the last thing I'm going to add to it is a lot of times when you go into a game and you're running around an environment, and you're not quite sure what you have to do to make things work, you have to kind of test stuff out. And so what I'm going to do is the player doesn't really know, once I put a key on that like we do with the door, you don't really know that you're supposed to hit the E key to open up that door. What we're going to do with this light is we're going to tell the player what to do so they know what to do, and we're going to instruct them how to do that once, and then we'll just make that go away. So they understand the first time when they encounter a light how they're supposed to turn it on, and then from then on they're on their own to figure out to remember that that's how you turn lights on and off as you go throughout the game. So that's kind of what we're going to do. We're going to set up here. So I'm going to get out of this and come back, and we're going to be creating a basic blueprint for this light. And you can see that it's got a couple of elements going on, and it's got a trigger similar to what we had when we dealt with the door. So once you've kind of done the door, you really have a good idea of what we're doing to start with on this, and that'll give us the ability to do what we need to do. Now, I have given you in the basic level to download from the Google Drive. The light is part of it, and I have a SM lamp wall and the materials to go with it, and I have brought that out and the textures out of another level and put it in here so you would have access to it. Obviously you can do this with any model. Once you understand how to make it work with this lamp, you can do it with any object that requires lights, so you can create your own models of lights or download models of lights and use them and set them up exactly the same way as what we're going to show you here. Once you've got the basic understanding of how to have a lamp, how to put lights in it, how to turn those lights on and off, and how to control it, then you've got basically, literally, a blueprint to look at from here on in whenever you need to do that. The same thing with the door. Now, there are a lot of things that had to go on the door because of rotation and animation that we don't have to deal with on this. It's somewhat simpler, but it's going to cover some ground that we didn't have to cover in the door just because we're adding in multiple lights and we're adding in some text. And the other thing we're going to do on this one is we're going to give you the ability to change the way an object is edited, or let's say you've created this lamp in this lamp class and you've got them around your environment, but you decide you'd like to change the color of one of the lights on one of the instances of the blueprint. Instead of having to go back and create a duplicate of that blueprint and change the light color, what we're going to do is we're going to give you the ability, actually in your editor details panel over here on the right hand side, we're going to give you the ability to go in and make changes to a particular blueprint light here on the fly. And you'll see we're going to give you the ability to turn a light on and off, or whether to start with it on or off, and also to maybe change the color of the light to give you just a little bit of added editing power, so to speak. And I think you'll find that this is one of the nice things about building blueprints in here, is that it just gives you so much control without you having to go back and reinvent the wheel every time you need a variation on something. So that's where we're going to go, and that's what we're going to be doing. Now, I talked about when we did the door that there were 2 ways to create a blueprint. One of them was to select an object and to right-click, go to Asset Actions, and then go to Create a Blueprint using this, and it will then set one up. This is the other way to do it, and sometimes you may need to do it this way depending upon like if you're not quite sure all the elements that are going to go in there. And here's the way that I do that. You right click down here in the window, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up and I'm going to select Blueprint Class. Now, the reason I am showing you this is there's more than one type of blueprint. If you watch the original videos that come with Unreal 4, you know that there are level blueprints that deal with events, and when we do the elevators and the elevator lift and things like that, you're going to see it is an area blueprint. It's designed to make things work on the screen, but not really have individualistic control. We're not creating a new class called an elevator. We're going to be creating a blueprint that works and makes your animation work on your elevator. But there's a variety of different types of classes that we can use. Now, actor is what we have been using. The door was an actor. This light is going to be an actor. But you can see pawns can be blueprint classes, the character, player controllers, game modes, actor components, and scene components. Any one of these can become a type of blueprint that we want to use. But actor is what we use most of the time. It's not really in alphabetical. You'll notice it's not in alphabetical order here. Actor is at the top because this is what we use 90% of the time. So I'm just going to create a new actor class, and it's going to add it in here. And then if I double click on it and open it up, this is what I get. Now remember, in the door, we saw the door here. Now I'm seeing this little ball, and the reason I'm seeing this little ball is because I don't really have a model in here yet. And you can see default scene root is what is listed in this new blueprint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this out of the way here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rename this one. I'm going to call it, let's call it the sconce. I'm going to call it BP sconce because that's a sconce light. If you don't know what a sconce light is, it's a light like this. It sits up on the wall, and it's kind of a high-end light that shines light up an hour. And you'll see it in a lot of architectural buildings, and a lot of homes have sconce lights in there also for lighting up an area. It's kind of like a wall area light. So I've got this thing called BP sconce, and so now when I pull this thing back over, close that down, pull this thing back over here, and you can see that this is kind of what I have. Now, the light isn't in here yet because I haven't added it. In order to add that light, what I want to do is I want to make sure that the light is selected. And then I'm going to come over here to Add Component. And you'll see now I need to add the static mesh. And here underneath my static mesh, it tells me right there what it is I'm selecting. I'm putting a static mesh in here, and the one that I am adding in is my SM lamp underscore wall. All right. Now, if I don't have that thing selected and I go back over here to add component, static mesh it's not going to know to get the light. So as soon as you select the light and then come back and do this, it knows that that's what it's supposed to bring in, so it does. So it's selected there, and when I click on it, it brings in that light and it puts it right there on top of that little sphere. Now, this is one of the reasons why I'm doing this one separately from the door. If you remember, I told you you can't move the door. The door comes in when you create a blueprint, and the door comes in, and you can add triggers to it, and you can do a lot of things, but the door itself cannot be moved, it cannot be scaled, and it can't be rotated. There's really nothing you can do with it. It's a model because it's going to be doing certain things. You really don't want that kind of control over it. By starting out this way, what I have here is I have a sphere that is the immovable object that identifies it as a blueprint. Okay, now I've added a model in there on top of it. The model, you'll notice, it's highlighted and it has the little pivot arrows on there. I can pick that thing up and I can move it around. In this particular case, I don't want to move it around, but let's say I bring it into my scene and it's rotated 90 degrees, and I'm like, well, that's a pain in the butt. Every time I bring this light in, I have to rotate it 90 degrees. This gives me the opportunity to come back in here and to actually rotate this 90 degrees in here, so every time I add a light into my world, it's okay. Here's an example. I'm going to go ahead and compile this one, and I'll pull this one back out of the way, and I'll drag this new blueprint, BP sconce. I'll drag it out into my scene and let go of it there, and then I'll pull it up, and you can see it's actually rotated 90 degrees And so it would be kind of nice if I didn't have to do that. Now, you notice that little sphere right here. If I go back and look at it in game mode, the little sphere doesn't show up. All right, so I'm going to show you how to make that go away here in just a second. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in now. I'm going to go back into here, and I'm going to rotate that sconce 90 degrees. So it's all done. Now if I hit compile again and go back and look at it, that is now rotated 90 degrees here, and I can put it up against the wall. And I'll slide it up a little bit, and maybe I'll move it over and move it down. And I think I'll get rid of this one just so we're not looking at that one and it's not being confused. That I now have this sconce model. Okay, center it, and if I go back and play with it, you'll notice now that that little sphere is not there and the sconce is up against the wall and ready to give off light. Now, the little sphere can be kind of annoying, and at this point I really don't want to move the sconce anymore. I'm not going to be moving that model anymore. So you can see in your components list over here, I've got default scene root, that's that sphere, and I've got my lamp. If I grab the lamp and I slide it up like this so it highlights default scene root, the little sphere goes away, and now my lamp is the default scene root, and now my little pivot points have gone away, and that lamp will no longer be movable. Okay, so that little thing is not in the scene. It doesn't show up here. I don't have to worry about whether or not it's going to render. In fact, you can tell that the lamp was being obscured by that sphere. So now that I've gotten rid of it, I can actually see things a little bit more clearly, and it's going to be a little bit easier to do the work that I have to do. So that's how we can get rid of that and do that. And you can see that's why in this particular case, unlike the door, which I did not want to deal with the rotation with at all, I had the rotation on it. It was all set and ready to go. This one I did need to rotate. So by bringing it in the way I brought it in, I can move it around. And then once I've got it in the correct position, set up the way I want, then I just click and drag it up a notch so it intersects with the default scene root, and then it replaces that, and now it is the default scene root, and the sphere is gone. All right, now what I'm going to want for this is I'm going to actually want to add a couple of things to it. I'm going to add 2 lights to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my components, and I'm going to scroll down. You'll see right here at the top you have common: audio, particle system, point light, scene, skeletal mesh, static mesh, sphere, and cube. Those are generally what it determines you're going to want to use the most. In this particular case, however, I want a spotlight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down in here to my light section, and I've got directional, point, again, skylight, and a spotlight. And I'm going to add a spotlight to my scene. Okay, now it brings it in and drops it in. In this particular case, okay, it's below it and it's facing in the wrong direction. If I back up, you'll see that it's actually shining right straight out in front of it there. And what I would like that light to do is I would like that light to shine upwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. 90 degrees there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull this up inside the model. Now, this is where you need to remember how lights work and how models are built. You would think, why would I want to put a light inside of the model? How come I don't like take this and move it up above the light bulb so it's supposed to simulate light coming out? Well, the problem with that is that you can see here how that light is shining, and you notice how the cone is completely above the rim of my lamp. So you would think then that the best thing, I'm going to have to pull this thing down inside to try to get one to line up with the other, but it's now down inside of that model, and you would think, well, what's going to happen is the model is going to block the light. But you have to remember there is no inside on objects. When you're dealing with a 3D object, whether it's in a game engine or whether it's in a modeling program like Max or Maya or Blender, there is an outside surface, but there is no inside surface. And if there was an inside surface, it would block the light coming through. But because there is no inside surface, if I get down in here and I go inside that lamp, you can see how it disappears. There is no inside. I can actually look right down the inside of that model in through here and see that there is no inside surface. I can see the outside surfaces of objects, but there is no inside surface, so it doesn't actually block light. Now, momentarily, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull this thing up here because I need to make a couple of setting changes to the way that that light works. Number one, if you wanted to see how it works, if you hit the compile, now what's happened is I have a model and I have a light in there, and if I go back and I look in my scene, I can actually see how the light is shining on the wall. That's really helpful when you're trying to set these things up. It's also really helpful if you happen to have another monitor. So you can grab this and pull it off on another monitor so you can kind of see what's happening in it. I'm going to pull it over here, I think, kind of half off my screen, so I can look at this because I want to see what's happening. And I'm going to make a couple of changes to the light. Now, the light changes occur in the details panel of the blueprint, not in the detail panel of the world. Okay, I'm doing it over here on the left. I'll open that up just a little bit more so I can kind of see what's happening. First thing I want to do is the light is really intense. I'm going to turn that down. I'm going to take it down to about 2000. That's about a 200 watt bulb there. And then I'm going to go in, I'm going to change the outer cone, and I'm going to make that outer cone, the angle of this cone, much bigger. Right now it's about a 45-degree angle is about what's going on. It's 44 degrees. I'm going to take that up. I'll try a 65-degree angle and see how that works. And I think that might actually be pretty good. And then I'm going to take this light over here and I'm going to pull it down inside until it comes right down and touches the top edge of that bowl on that thing. Okay. And that works pretty good. And then what I'm going to do is you can't make any changes to it in your actual engine. In the world scene, you have to make any changes to it over here. I'm going to pull this thing back just a little bit. You need to make sure, maybe forward, I'll pull it forward. You don't want to come through the bottom. If I come through the bottom of this thing, then it'll show up through the bottom in here. So I need to keep that light above that, but I'm trying to make sure that I get as much light coming out here as possible. And I think that works pretty good. I also have to make sure that I don't take that light and come back too far, because what happens is this is part of this model right here. So it's not behaving, the light's not being blocked by the inside of this particular thing. But if I have the light too far back like that, you notice the light's gone. Where did the light go? Well, it's inside that wall, and now it is being blocked by that wall. So I have to make sure that that light is showing the way it needs to show. So I'm going to try to make some adjustments to it, and if I have to, I might go ahead and make that outer cone maybe 70. Flatten it out just a little bit, and then I can pull it up and pull it back just a little bit. So it's about the way I want it to be, and then we can get that all set up and ready to go. All right. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color on it. And the reason I'm going to change the color is that this is gold. And so the light should have a little bit of a gold cast to it instead of being bright white. So right here under light color, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click that little box right here. And when the window comes up, I'm just going to drag this towards the yellow just a little bit. The direction that you want to take is you just kind of want to pull it at an angle towards the yellow down here, just so it's a light yellow, kind of a cream color, and you can see the way that color is up over here. And you can make some adjustments to it. It just kind of warms it up just a little bit and kind of simulates it's coming out of this dish. And that works pretty good. So let's back this thing up here and take a look at it, and you can kind of see what's happening. If you want the light to go further up the wall, then what you're going to do is you're going to go in here to your attenuation, and you can change the attenuation. I'll take this attenuation up to about 6,000. And you can see the light kind of goes up the wall a little bit more now. To a certain extent that's kind of what you're getting. You also want to make sure that your shadows are turned on. That's important on this light. This is the main light. One of the things you're going to discover when we start working with lighting in particular, and we start doing more stuff with lighting, is the tricks that you have to use to simulate real-world lighting. While this type of an engine is way more accurate in terms of lighting and shadow and getting something to look good using lighting techniques, it still is not the real world. It's still, things don't work exactly like they do in the real world. If I have a candle, like a birthday candle and a cake, it gives off a certain amount of light and it behaves a certain way. If I have a flashlight, it gives off a certain amount of light and behaves a certain way. If I have one of those big searchlights, the big things that they use like at movie premieres and stuff like that, they give off much more light and also behave a certain way. But one light does each of those things. When you get into a fake environment, which is what Unreal is, or a 3D program like Max or Maya, sometimes it takes 3 or 4 lights to do what one real world light can do. And that's going to be the case of this one. I've got one light that's casting that upwards light. That's my main light. And I want the shadows turned on because of the way that has to cast shadows. But I'm going to add another light into this to simulate the light that's coming through that glass, that yellow glass here. I'm going to need another light to simulate the light that comes out of here. This is light only going up. But I need another light that's going to simulate the way that one works. But I don't want shadows on that one because the shadows are being controlled by this light up here. This one is just simply adding light without shadow. So you just need to be aware that there are going to be some times when you need to have shadows turned on and sometimes you don't, and you're going to need to use fill lights. That's the main light, and I'm going to need a fill light here in just a second. In fact, let's go ahead and add it now. I'm going to come over to my add component, and what I want to add a point light, and it's conveniently up near the top because it's considered a common element, something you add a lot of. And I'm going to go ahead and add it, and it brings it in, and it just kind of, it's like intensely bright. Whoops. It's intensely bright. I'm going to have to go in here in my top view. I kind of screwed that up. Bring it into the top view, and I want to make sure that it's right here in front of the other one. You can see the model is right there. There's my light. And you can't go by the images. You can see the way that the images look here, the representational, they call them billboards for the particular light. You have to go by the crosshairs on that. Don't go by the picture itself. So I want to make sure that that's kind of centered there. And once I got that, let's go look in my left view. And what I want to do, again, there's the purple sconce light over here. I want to take this and I want to pull it down and kind of bring it out here in front. And I'll go back to my perspective at that point, and I've got it kind of where I want it to be. Maybe a little closer. Like that. All right. What happened to me was you have to be very careful about using your mouse controls when you're in here. Right click rolls the world around. Right and left mouse together, buttons together, moves you back and forth like that. All right, you can go up and down, side to side. If you're holding left and right together, if you're just holding the right, you're rotating it around. Well, if you're too close to an object and you're like if you're anywhere inside these areas of the arrows and you right click, sometimes what happens is you actually move the object by accident. Or I think if I'm out here, maybe most things I'll move something by accident. And you have to go and find a way to put it back. That's where your top or your side views come back into. You can switch the view and go in and move things back to where they need to be. So I've got this light and been added in here. What I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to go in and I'm going to turn it way down as well because it's incredibly hot. You can see the way that it's bouncing off that thing. It's set, looks like the intensity of that is set to 5,000. I'm going to bring that down to about 200 just because it's a secondary light down here. And I also want to give it the same basic color that I gave the other one. So they don't have to be exactly the same. I'm just going to click on that box. I'm going to pull this one up, and I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to click and drag this down this way a little bit, and I think I pulled that down a hair. And that's close enough. You don't really have to be dead on. In fact, the combination of the two together actually gives you can actually do some really nice lighting techniques with that. And then on this one, I want to turn shadows off. I don't want this one casting shadows. I don't want it to cast a light upwards on the wall. And I'll compile that, and I'll go back and I'll look at it, and you can see kind of what's going on. Whoops. You can see what happens. It's like sometimes what happens is you try to move something and it's actually got that thing selected. So let's go in and look, make sure that that's right up against the wall. I have my snap was set really low, so let's set my snap back up to 10. It should have butted right up against the wall. So there we go. I've got light downwards and I have light upwards. And if I go back and test this thing out and look at it, you can see you kind of have that effect. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. The environment's not very dark, so you can see it's giving off a nice subtle ambient light, which is what I'm looking for. Now that's doing pretty good. All right, so my light is basically all set up. My blueprint here is all set up and all ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to start to do now my blueprint work. And I'm going to make sure I've deselected everything there, and that way I can zoom back in and not worry about accidentally moving something. So there we go. I have one light inside, I have one light in front, and I have the model, and it's in place and all ready to go. Check that. Yeah. Pull that up a notch, I think. Okay. So I'm going to go to my event graph. Now this is, I talked about you have some elements that are in there. I'm going to, and you've seen now that we've done these, event actor begin overlap, event begin play. We've used both of those already. Event tick we haven't used, but this does not pertain to what it is I have going on. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete those. And in fact, now that I'm looking at it, I realize that this needs to have a trigger, because I want the player to step into a trigger box, and then that's going to turn the light on. I forgot that's what we need to have for this one. So go back to my component. Let's go down. Same thing we did with the door. Go down. We're going to add a box collision, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to set it down here in front of the light on the wall. If you're not sure where it's going to be, remember, if you hit compile, what it'll do is it'll now add that into this, and I can see that's where that light is. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it kind of out in front a little bit, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Let's make that 64 wide or deep, and we'll go 64 wide. And I don't think I really need to go any higher than that. The player is going to step into it, but you can do that too. We'll just make that 64 by 64 by 64 across the way, and then that's above the ground. Basically, my player is going to step into that, and that's what's going to turn that light on, and it's centered pretty much right there in front of them. So we're good there. I've added that thing in. I'm going to call that light trigger, and I'll compile it. And now let's go back over here and look at our event graph, and let's start creating some stuff to go in here. Now, much like we did with the door, I need to have those two commands that are if I step into the trigger or if I step off the trigger. And to do that, we make sure that we have the trigger selected. We're going to right-click, add event for light trigger, collision, and begin overlap. And then I select it, and I'm going to go right back and get it right now while I'm thinking about it, because I need both of them. End overlap. Those are the two things that I'm going to need to have. Right? Now, this can get kind of confusing over here when we have spotlight and we have point light. What I want to do is I want to change the names. I'm going to have to bring these in. I'm going to have to use these components, but referring to them in generic terms like spotlight or point light can get confusing when you're dealing with a lot of different lights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in, I'm going to go back, I'm going to rename them. The spotlight is actually the sconce light itself. So I'm going to give that the name of sconce light. The point light down here is what we call a bounce light. And that might make it a little bit easier as I'm doing things, as I'm trying to figure out which of these commands I'm going to need to have, which nodes I'm going to need to bring in and use, because we're going to be using a lot of them here in this coming video as we finish this thing out. So let's go ahead and rename those things. Okay, and then what I want to do is when we're dealing with lights and we want lights to go on or off, we're dealing with light visibility. And that's the key word that we have to look for, is visibility, when we're going to go in and we're going to put a node on there. What I would like is, if you step onto the light trigger, I want the lights to become visible. And when you step off of the trigger or out of that box, the lights are going to go invisible. So what I'm going to need is I'm going to need a command over here for toggle, which is turning things on and off, visibility. Now you can see I get a bunch of them here, okay? And you can see I actually have one for both of them. I've got bounce light, I have trigger light, or sconce light, and I have bounce light. And I have also the ability to make the trigger box go visible or invisible, which I don't want at all, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to select the bounce light one. That's the first one that's going to pop up. So I'm going to select that. Give it a second here to think. And it's going to come in with this little capsule. Now we've seen these capsules before. That is the variable. So I have two variables over here, one for sconce light and one's for visible light or bounce light. And what I've done is, by toggle visibility and selecting the bounce light, what it did is it already brought in the bounce light attached to it. So now when I step on that trigger, it's going to toggle the visibility of the bounce light. Okay. Now, instead of toggle visibility is a one-shot deal. It's on or it's off. It's on or it's off. I don't need to do what I did with the door, which was enable or disable, or in this particular case, step on or step off. Okay. I just need one visibility. And the way that it works is, think of it as literally as a light switch. Step on the trigger, it turns the switch on. What does it turn on? It turns on the bounce light. If I step off of that trigger, it turns the switch. If it's on, it goes off. If it's off, it goes on. All right. Now I also need to have the other light added into that. So I'm just going to grab my sconce light and I'm going to bring it out here, and it'll just drop it in my scene. And I'm going to wire that over here to my target. Okay, so step on the trigger. What's going to happen is it's going to trigger those lights. In this particular case, watch what happens. Let's compile that. And let's go back and look at my scene and see what happens. You know about where that box is on the floor. In fact, I think what I'll do here is I'm going to go over, and in order to make this thing a little bit more visible, I think what I'm going to do, so you know where it is, and there are a lot of times I will do this when I'm trying to figure out exactly where something is. I'm going to bring a cube out here, and that's going to slide it over there and put it in there. And I don't need it to be anywhere near that big. In fact, I'd like it to be maybe 0.1. Maybe even 0.01. And I'll just set that right there on the floor. Okay, it's not really going to affect anything, but what that does is that tells me where that trigger is, so I know approximately where it is as I'm trying to figure things out. And if I come over here, you notice the light is on. Step into that trigger, light goes off. Back up, light goes on. Go forward, light goes off. Now that's kind of the opposite of what I want, okay? But there's something I want to show you that's happening inside of this window here as I am doing that. So let's see if I can figure out how to kind of, I'll shrink this up a little bit. Watch these lines right here as I go in and I play the game. I'll swing around here so I can step on that trigger. Watch those lines. You see that? What's happening? What that's telling me is when I step on that trigger, that's the sequence that's firing. I back it off. I'm now firing the get off the trigger. Go forward, step on the trigger. I can see that lines. Now, again, if you're dealing with another monitor and you have this thing off to the side, you can keep this window open and you can watch what you're doing and you can actually see what is working in your blueprint. It's kind of a nice feature. So if I go back and do that again, it's a little easier for me to see now. Go step on that trigger. I'm firing that. Step off the trigger. I am firing that. All right? Now, I told you the trigger that's there, the toggle visibility, is just simply a light switch. It's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. So what I'm going to do here is the way that it is now set is the light is on because you can see them in the scene there. The lights are on. So when I step on the trigger, that light switch flips and turns them off. When I step off the trigger, it flips and turns them back on again. I want it to be just the opposite of that. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my sconce light here. I'm going to select my sconce light. And over in my details panel, I'm going to scroll down to the section that says rendering. And it says visible. I'm going to uncheck that. As soon as I uncheck it, that top light's gone away. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'll select the bounce light. I'm going to go down. I'm going to uncheck visible. Now both of those lights are off. So the way that that's going to work is when I go in and play the game, the lights are off. And now when I step on that trigger, the light switch is going to then turn on. And if I step out of that box, it turns the light out. On, off, on, off. So you can set up environments that control lights with a trigger. You can go back in and you can set up a room or some sort of an environment. You can put however many lights you want to be turned on. Maybe you step into a warehouse and you've got all these big overhead lights. You want the person to step in there and then maybe those lights all go on, and as soon as they leave the room, the lights all go back off again. Your setup is going to be just exactly like this. Step on the trigger, light switch, step off the trigger, light switch. What is it lighting up? These two lights. And it's pretty easy to do. Now, what this thing doesn't do is it doesn't actually contain a light switch. I don't actually have to interact with anything. I go onto that trigger and the light turns on. Well, what if you wanted a situation where the player has to go up to a light switch and then physically interact with the light switch? Now, I don't mean the animation of the third-person character reaches up and hits a button or flips a switch. That's usually something that's handled with a cutscene because it's dealing with straight animation. We're not dealing with game engine animation. We're dealing with straight animation. So that would be a cutscene that would be done maybe using models in a 3D program and then rendered out as an animation that you can use as a cutscene, which we'll show you how to do later in the semester, and then edit those in there. But in this particular case, I just want it to be you come in contact with something. You bump up against something or you get close enough to it, and then it's as if the player has turned that on. So right now, that's not happening. Right now, you just trigger the light by stepping into that box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break that link. I'm going to right-click and break that link. And I'm going to take these three things, I'm going to kind of pull them out of the way for right now and drop them down here because I need to do some other things. I'm going to need those. I'm going to come back to those because they're still part of what it is that I need to do. I need to toggle some visibility, but what I want to do is I want to go in and I want to add in the use of my key. I'm going to use a key on the keyboard. So I think we're going to go back and we're going to bring those things back up here in a second, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do some other elements right now. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, I'm going to hit E because I'm just going to use the same E key for this. If we press the E key, it's going to turn the light on. Remember, it's not like a worldwide thing. Remember, my door has, you press the E key to open up the door, but you have to be standing on the trigger for that E key to work. So I can use E keys all over the place. I can make the E key be the standard usability key throughout my game engine. But what I'm doing is I've created a series of triggers that it will not work unless you are standing in that trigger. So the E key will work on this light if you're standing on that trigger, but it won't automatically open up the door, unless, of course, the door and the light, the two triggers, were overlapping each other, which, as I've already said, you don't ever want to overlap doors or triggers. You want to make sure triggers are never overlapping because it creates an endless loop that will crash your game. In this particular case, if I wanted to do that, then I can combine the E with the door opening and the light opening. You just basically take these two things and put them all together in the same blueprint, and everything works together. But I'm keeping them separate, but I can use the E key everywhere. Now, like I did with the door, I needed a variable that asked the question, was the door open? So I needed to know the status of the door. So I'm going to need another variable here that is going to ask the status of the light. And basically the question I'm asking here is my light already on or already off? Remember, my toggle visibility down here just acts as a switch, on, off, and then every time you do something, it just does the opposite. So I want a little bit more control over here because this one means I have to go back and turn lights off and do that. This one I want to know whether or not the light is on, so I have some control over it. So I'm going to create a new variable over here. It's going to be a Boolean, which is what I want. And I'm going to ask the question, is it on? So is the light on? Okay, it's a Boolean by default. And I'm going to bring this thing out, and I'm going to use get, because I'm just going to ask the question, is that what's going to happen? Now, like I also did with the door, what I'm going to want to know here is if this is pressed, I'm going to need a branch because I'm going to have two different ways in which to take this. If the light is off, then I'm going to want to turn it on. If the light is on, I'm going to want to turn it off. So we're going to ask the condition, is it on? If I press the E key, what is it that I want to happen? I want to toggle visibility. So I'm going to go back down. Let's get these two things down here, these three things, and we're going to bring them up here. And I'll bring that. I'm going to bring this up. Maybe put that about there, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to bring it up. So what we're going to say here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to wire this up to that. Now, in this particular case, I need another toggle visibility because remember, they act as an independent switch. So this is my light on. I'm also going to need a light off. So I'm just going to duplicate that, Control W, duplicates it, and I'm going to bring this down, and I'm going to wire those two lights into this one as well because I have to tell it, it needs to know which lights are being controlled. What are the targets? The targets are my sconce light and my bounce light. Those are the two lights. So the way that this works is it asks the question, is it on? If it's true, do this. If it's false, do that. Right? Now the last thing I need to add to this to make this work is I'm going to go ahead and determine whether or not the light is on. And if you remember back from the door, what I did was I created a variable that asked the door status, and then I had to go and get that particular door status. And what I have here is I asked the question, is it on? What I need to do is I need to bring this variable back out, and I'm going to bring it up here and let go, and I'm going to choose set. And I'm going to wire that into this, and then I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to bring this down to this one, and I'm going to wire that back into that. Now, the difference between these two, if you remember the door, we asked the question, was the door open or was it closed? And the way we determined whether it was open or closed was by answering the question where it asks it right here. Check mark, the first one is unchecked. The second one is checked. So in this particular case, when we press the key, we're going to ask the question, is the light on? If the light is on, then we're going to come up here and we're going to turn it off. If the light is off, which means it's not on, we're going to come down here, and then we're going to do the opposite. We're going to turn it on. Follow that? So press the E key, ask the question, is it on? If it is, do this, turn it off. If the light isn't on, do this, turn it on. What lights are we talking about? The sconce light and the bounce light. And they're both hooked up to targets. So let's compile this, and let's go back and see what happens when we do that. So now we're going to come back over here. I'm going to run up, and I'm going to step on that trigger. Now you notice the light did not go on. If I hit E, it's still not going on. All right, now probably what's happening here is I need to go back and turn those lights back on. Let's go back in here and turn that light on the visible, and we'll go to this one, and we'll turn that light on the visible, and we'll compile it and check and see. Why is my E key not working? All right, let me pause this here for a second. Let me go back and check, and I'll tell you what I did wrong. Ah, my bad. All right, here's what I forgot to do. The reason it's not working is because I got this all set up. My E key works, but remember, I don't actually have anything over here that makes the input work for that E key. So remember I broke away these two elements over here. But what I needed to do at that point was, before I started that E, I needed to set this up the exact same way I had set up the door. And the way that that was I'm going to right click and I'm going to do an enable input. That only took me about 5 minutes to find that because I had to go back through everything. Then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put a disable input. Okay, and one gets put into input, one gets put into disable input. Remember, these are the two things that make that E key work. Without that, it doesn't work. And then one of the things I need to have in here is my player controller. So I'm going to pull that out, and I'm going to say get player controller. And it'll drop that in right there. And then that also gets wired into player controller down here. Let's try it again. So remember, you have to, in order for your input keys to work, you have to use enable input and then disable input. So when I step on that trigger, it's going to turn that E key capability on. When I step off the trigger, it turns the E key off. So I can't go 30 feet away and hit E and make that light turn on. I have to go right up to it. So let's try it over here again. Let's run over to this thing. Step on the trigger, I hit E, they go off, hit E, they come back on. Right? So in order to fix that, then what we'll do now is we'll come back over to here, and I turn those lights back on because I thought that was the problem. The light is going to be starting out invisible. That takes the light switch effect right here. The light switch toggle visibility now is off. So when I press the E key, if the light is off, which it is, turn it on. If the light is on, which it will be, then turn it off. So we'll compile that, and we'll go back now, and the lights are off. And what we'll do is we'll run over, we'll step on that little trigger so I know that it's there. I hit E, light goes on, hit E, light goes off. E on, E off. Sweet. All right. So that works pretty good. So what I'll do is I'm going to draw a box around this one. I'll put in a comment. The comment is step on or off triggers. And then this one is, whoops, press E to turn on light. Okay, and it's a really easy thing for anybody now looking at that to know exactly what's going on. So press E to turn on the light. Now, wouldn't it be nice, let me compile that and save it. Every time you make a change, you have to do the same thing. So wouldn't it be nice, let me pull this thing over to the side, wouldn't it be nice if I had the ability in here to change the way that this object worked? Maybe I'd like to change the color of the light. Maybe I'd like to do something else. Maybe I'd like to start out with the lights being on. Right now, if I make 5 copies of this thing, or at least make a copy and put a copy over here, I now have 2 of these triggers. I can delete that at this point. I now have 2 of those triggers. I got 2 of those lights. If I go in, they're both off. They both function the same. Go to this one, hit E, light goes on. Go over here to this one, hit E, light goes on. Okay, and I can turn that one off, and I can come back over here to this one. I can turn that one off. Okay, but what if I want those 2 lights to function differently? How can I set that up without having to go back and recreate my blueprint class? It doesn't seem to make any sense that I would have to go back and create yet another blueprint, maybe select this one and duplicate it and give it another name just to make changes to the way it worked. It would be really nice if all of those changes were visible and I could deal with each light individually. Remember, when you're dealing with this detail panel here, if I select that sconce light, I am dealing with the light in my blueprint. So that's that one. If I touch the bounce light, I'm dealing with the details on that bounce light. If I look out here in my world and I click on an object, I have a details panel over here that talks about that particular panel. But it's not all panels, it's that particular panel, or this particular panel, or that particular object, or this particular panel, or that particular floor. Each thing has its own detail over here. So consequently, if I click on this light, I have a detail panel that deals with this one. This does not change the blueprint. All right? Well, it does change the blueprint. I can go in and make some changes to it. It'll change the blueprint, but it doesn't change this blueprint, even though it's the exact same model. It has its own settings over here also in terms of your detail panel. This one has its own settings. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back and we're going to make some changes to our light here. So we have the ability to go in and affect changes in the game engine detail window. And in order to do that, this is where this construction script comes in. Now remember, I mentioned the construction script. Anything that is happening in the event graph, all of these things right here are being read right there. The construction script is what the engine reads to do the blueprint. The events are just elements contained within this single node, which contains all of those nodes all built into it. Right? If I would like to maybe make these things appear out over here, then I have to come in and I have to make changes to the script itself. And it's a fairly simple thing to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my sconce light and I'm going to bring in my bounce light, because those are the 2 things that I would like to make changes to. In fact, what I'd like to do is I'm going to separate them out just a little bit here. All right. And what I want to do is I'm going to pull a bar out of this one, a wire out of this one, and I'm going to type in set light color. And I'm going to add that in. And I'm going to wire that right up to this. And that does pretty much what you think that it would do. What that is going to do is it's going to allow me to see that thing and change the color in the window itself. Now, there are a couple of things I've got to do in order for that to happen. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add another variable here. What I'm going to do is, see where it says new light color right here? I'm going to right click on that and I'm going to select promote to variable. Now, what that's going to do is it's going to do the same thing as me coming over here to the left and clicking create a new variable, but instead of having to go through the steps to make sure that I have the correct type of variable, this will automatically create a variable and set it the way that it is supposed to be. All right, so now I have this thing called this new variable here, and I'm going to kind of pull that up so it's kind of out of the way above the other ones here. So I have this thing called a new variable. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in there and I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to give it a new name. You can either do it here on the left or you can do it up over here on the right. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let's call this one light color. Okay. Now, this light color, I've got to make some changes to it because it's not showing up over here where it needs to be yet. And I want you to watch this area on my screen right here between transform and static mesh. Watch this area over in here. First thing I want to do is I want to make sure that this is editable. This new thing here called light color, I want that to be editable. So I'm going to click the button right here that says that it is editable. Okay. Now, when I go ahead and I click compile, here we go. Make sure that was selected. When I click that, you see I have something here called light color, and it's got a black light on there. I'm going to come back. I'm going to fix that in a second. All right. But it has added in something in here called default, right between transform and rendering, and it's added it in. You have to have the object selected, which I hadn't done. That's why it was there. It wasn't showing up. It's going to add in something called default. Now, that default is the category. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to highlight default. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to name that set light color. Yeah, let's just call it lighting. All right. I'm just going to call that, I'm going to make that category lighting, just because it's getting kind of important. Tooltip right here. The tooltip is going to be set light color. What does that do? That's going to go ahead and change my category to lighting right there. And it's going to give me a tooltip. So when I hold the mouse over the top of it, it says set light color. So the tooltip is what's going to show up when you hover the mouse over it. Set light color. Lighting is what's going to be in here. In fact, let's go ahead and call this changes. I think there's a lighting one in there already. So we'll call this light properties. So now if I hit compile again, that now says lighting properties. And it has a color down over here. And then what I want to do is I want to set a primary color to begin with. Okay, the color of those lights to begin with. Remember, I already did that within the light, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go in and right down here it says default value. I'm going to click on this box and I'm just going to go ahead and drag that over. In fact, I'm going to give myself some specific colors. I'm going to go in here and say we're going to make this 1 for the red, 0.93 for the green, and 0.63 for the blue. And it's going to give me that same basic beige color. That light yellow color is going to be back in here. So I'm going to go 1, 0.93, and 0.63 for my 3 colors, and I'm going to click OK. That is now the current color. Let's compile that. And you can see I now have light property right here, and I have color. Okay. Now that's for my sconce light. So let's take this and we'll call this one, let's change that up there to be sconce light color. We'll compile that. So there's my sconce light color. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to create another one of these. I'll right click and let's put in another set. Make sure I get the right thing. Set light color. So we're going to right click and type in set light color. And in this particular case, I'm dealing now not with a sconce, but with a bounce light. So I can actually delete that if I want to. That's already wired up. And then I'm going to do the same thing. Let's pull this down to here. I think what I can do, it's only going to let me do one. I can do one of them at a time. So I think what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and do this one. And I think I can take and wire that one up to there. Delete that. wire that up to there, and now what I have is I've got the ability, it's changing both of those lights. So we'll go ahead and we'll set that back, to take that back to just regular light color. Call it good. Now if I change one, I'm going to change both of them together. Okay, so my light colors are over here, and I can change those. So what we'll do is we'll leave this here for right now. I'm going to pull this off to the side, and then what I can do is I can click on this light over here, and I have that same ability. Let's make these lights red. All right, so those lights are red. This light is still yellow, but that one is red. So now if I go in and play, both sets of lights are off. I come over to this one, turn it on, it's that color. Go over to this one, turn it on, it's that color. And they're both controlled by E. And if I back away from it and run over here, remember, all three things are being controlled by the E key. E key doesn't work out over here until I get in close. E, go over here, E, and I think that's still an old door. I don't think that door is actually the blueprint door. So that was in another level. So I have all of those controls over here, and everything works pretty good. So I think my sconce is good, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I'm going to close that down for a moment. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and see, you know, maybe what I would like to have is I would like to have this light be turned on to begin with, but that one not turned on. I would like to have the ability to turn on by default a light so it works the opposite of the other one. So let's go in and let's do that. I'm going to open up my blueprint again, and I'm going to look here, and there's my basic setup. There's my light color. There's my two lights being turned on down over here. What I want to do now is I'm going to go in and I'm going to pull a wire out of there, and let's do set visibility. Okay, and this is what's going to give me the ability to turn those lights on and off separately. So I'm going to do the same thing here that I did up that one, where I pulled, for my new light color, I pulled the thing out and it created its own variable. I'm going to come up here to new visibility, and I'm going to put a wire out. And I think what I'll do here is, I'm sorry, not pull a wire out, I'm going to right click and say promote to variable. It's going to give me a new variable here. It's now named over there, so what I'll do is I'll call this enabled by default. So I have this enabled by default on set visibility. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same basic things to this one that I did to the other one. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say enable it. Now I want you to notice, I'm going to turn that back off for a second. Look over here in my variables panel and see where it says enabled by default. Okay, and there's a little gray line over here to the right. If I come up over here and I click enable, that changes. Now I have a little light, a little eyeball down here. All right, that little eyeball is what makes it visible over here. Now the other two that I dealt with, okay, this one for light color, okay, is a different type of variable that's over here. It's going to be located in a little bit different place, but it's going to have the same thing going on right in front of it. Now is on, which is the one that I've got back over here, I don't want that one turned on because I'm going to be controlling it now using this. But that little light, this little eyeball, excuse me, means that it's going to be visible when I get done over here. In fact, if I go back and do that, it's now going to be over here. As soon as I say enable by default, I got an error because I'm not done yet. I want to enable that. The tooltip over here that I'm going to be used is light is on by default when checked. Okay, and then the category, in order to make sure it goes under my lighting properties right here, I just click on default and I have now my lighting properties. So if I now compile that, I now have enabled by default and a checkbox. Right now, the error I'm getting here has to do with the fact that enabled by default, it doesn't know what's enabled by default, and you may have spotted that before I did. But it's asking for the targets on this one again. So let me bring that target over here. That target goes to that one as well, and target goes to this one as well. Now, you don't have to do this, have it multiple wired like that. You can create another pair of them. You can just hit Control W, and you can bring another pair in and do it that way. I find that that's kind of unnecessary. The same two will work on all of those. I can plug those in anywhere I want. All right. So here's what I got. Enabled by default. Let me save that. So what I can now do is I can now close this. And what I can do is I can say, let's enable that one by default. So now this one is on. And I can now come over here and I can turn that one on or off. And I can come over here and I can turn that one off or on. So once you've basically started that process, you know, it doesn't really matter. It just might be that you need a light on in a particular room so the player can see, and then when they leave, you want that light turned off, and that's kind of what will happen for that. So that's kind of how those things go. Now, the one last thing that I want to do on this one is there really is no clue to the fact that you're using the E key to do anything with either one of those lights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a system here where there's actually text that is going to appear and then disappear. Well, once a player does it once, he doesn't need to be told every stinking time to press the E key to do something. That gets to be kind of old, and it gets disruptive of the player's immersion in the game. So I really don't want that to happen. I want them to be just, you do it once and you're over and done with it. I understand from now on, E is going to turn those keys on and off, or whatever key you would like it to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my sconce here, and I'm going to go back to my viewport. And this is one where you're going to want to see what you're doing at the same time, because as I do stuff, I'm going to want to see where that actually is out there. And I think for right now, I'm going to delete this one out here on my scene. I really don't need that. For right now, let's just stick with this one right here, and that'll be good for what we're doing. All right. So I'm going to add a new component to it. And the component I am looking for is a text component, and it's down kind of near the bottom. It's hard to find. First time you go looking for it, it's hard to spot. It's called text render. And I'm going to select that component. And it's going to put a text component right here. Now, I'm going to pull it away so you can see what it says. And right now, it says text. But it can say whatever I would like it to say. And I can put this wherever I want it to do. I'm going to make a couple of changes to this thing, to the way that it works. First of all, over here on the right, you can change your font if you want to. If you don't want to use that font, it'll use whatever fonts that you have added into the system. I'm just going to stick with that font because that works really well for me. It does have a pre-built material on it. And you might want to go back and create your own material for it. Maybe you'd like to make a glowing material. Maybe you would like to have that thing be a certain color and have it glow a little bit to simulate that. But for right now, I'm just going to leave this as text. That's something you can do later on. And if you do change it, you create your own material, and it's going to go right into this slot. But I've got text right there. Now I have horizontal alignment. Well, I'd like this to be centered in what I am doing. I also have some X and Y scale. You can sort of do whatever you would like to do. I think maybe for the purposes of this one, I'm going to pull this one back and I'm going to pull it up above the light. I did this different in the tutorial, but you're going to kind of see what I'm doing here. It just needs to be someplace visible. And it's centered kind of over the top of that thing. I guess that's about as centered as you're going to get on top of that. That'll work. So that's going to appear above the lamp. And if I wanted to know for sure that that's what it's going to look like, I can go out and I can take a look at it. And I can see there it is. That text is appearing. That's about the right size. I just really want that to appear so they know what to do, and then it does it from there. So I'm just going to go ahead and we'll leave it at that. Okay. I can also come in here and change the color of it. Let's maybe make it bright yellow. That's the one change that I can do to it. It's about as yellow as it's going to get here. There we go. It'll stand out in that scene for right now. So what I need to do now is I need to have that thing appear. Now I would like it to appear when the player steps into the trigger box. And there's the trigger box right here. When the player steps into there, I want that text to appear. So what I'm going to do by default is I'm going to turn it off. Now remember, we've done this with lights. If you want the light to be visible, then that's checked to be visible, and then the trigger takes over from there, or the visibility, toggle visibility takes over and acts like a light switch on, off, on, off, on, off. This one I want to start off. I don't want to see that word until I step into the trigger. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my event graph here, and I'm going to grab my whole, this one I'm going to kind of pull it off to the side because I'm going to make some adjustments here to what I'm doing. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to spread this out a little bit. And what I want to do is I want to make it visible when I step into this. Now that's a fairly simple thing to do. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a toggle visibility. And it says text render, so I'm going to add that in. And it comes in. Oops. Sometimes selecting things can be a pain. There's my text render, and there's my toggle visibility, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wire that in. So when I step onto the trigger, it's going to then take something that is turned off, and it's going to turn it on. So let's compile that. Toggle visibility, it comes in. Remember, when you add in the toggle visibility, it's going to ask you which of these objects you want. And so it gave me the option of any of the four of them. In this particular case, text render is what I chose. So let's pull this thing off to the side, and let's go back and see what happens if I step into that trigger box. The word text appears. All right, so good, that's working. So let's come back over here and let's say what that text is supposed to be. So I'm going to go back to my viewport and I'm going to click on my text render, and what I'm going to do is this is where I'm going to tell it what I want it to say. So right here under text, it says text. Let's say press E. Okay, so it's press the single quote and a capital E and then a single quote again. And if you want to see what it is, let's look at it and see. All right, that's what it says. Press E. I don't need to be more specific than that, although you can be as specific as you want. Okay, so we'll compile that. We'll save it. Let's pull this thing out of the way. Let's test it out again. Press E. I press E, the light goes on. All right, sweet. Except I want that whole thing to turn off at that point. Once it says press E, I don't really need anything more than that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back in and we'll just do the exact same thing, my event graph, except toggle visibility. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring this down here. And what I'm going to say is hook that up to that, bring my text render down to my target. So now what happens is this is set up. When I step on the trigger, it says that. When I step off of the trigger, it then goes away. That's step number one to this. So if I run over, if I back up, it goes away. Go in, goes away. Go in, goes away. Working pretty good. This thing kind of neat and organized. Compile that and save it. Now, I had mentioned earlier that I wanted this thing to work in such a way that I really only need to see that particular element once. I only need to see press E until the player presses E, and then once the player presses E, that E can go away. I don't need to see that anymore. So here's how we do that. Let's pull this thing back over here. I'm going to go over and I'm going to look at this. So this is my E key. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this thing over to the right because we're going to add a little bit more element, two more elements back out over here. Okay, this is what's controlling when I hit my E key. Things go visible, things go invisible. So what I want to do here is I've now got this text render. What I want to do is once it displays, I want it to go away and I don't ever want it to come back. All right, now the way we do that is we can destroy things. And when you destroy it, it does pretty much what you think. It's destroyed, it's done, it's gone. It never ever comes back. All right? So there are, if you want something just turned off or want something, we use a toggle visibility. If you want something hidden, there's a hide and unhide. There are ways to deal with elements either with an asset or in this particular case, a component. There are ways to deal with them if we just want them to be hidden or unhidden or visible or invisible. But if you want something to actually go away so it's not even part of the equation anymore, it does something, it does it once, and then it's over with, then what we do is we destroy it so it doesn't ever come back. Now, you can destroy an asset, which is like the light itself is an asset, or the wall is an asset. You can shoot an object, and if it's destroyed, if you're killing an enemy, you shoot the enemy. When he dies, he disappears and he doesn't ever come back. That would be a destroy an asset. In this particular case, what we're doing is we're destroying one of the components of this light. So what I'm going to want is I'm going to want to add into this thing a destroy component. So if I type in destroy, you're going to get the choices that you have for that. And in fact, in this particular case, I'm going to uncheck context sensitive. All right. And you'll see there is a destroy component right here. And the component is the key word we are looking for. This is a component. My text render is a component in here. So I want destroy component. And I'm going to wire that up to this. So basically what happens is, if that's the case, what you're going to do is you're going to turn that light switch on or off. And then at the same time, as soon as I hit E, it's going to then destroy the component. But I'm not telling it which component needs to be destroyed yet. There is no target. So to get that target, I'm just going to bring text render back out. And I'm going to wire text render into the target. So what will happen now is it's going to, if the E is pressed, it's going to turn the light on. And then it's going to destroy that text component. And it's going to go away, never to return. So let's compile that, and let's save it, and let's go test and see if that works. Okay, I'm standing here. It says press E. All right, well, let me press E. It goes away, and it's not working. So I missed something. Hang. Okay, here's what we need to do. So this is where we are. It's not working. I'm going to pull this thing off to the side. If I go into play, I come over, the light comes on, or the press E comes on, I press E, the light stays on. If I hit E again, it goes off. If I hit, and there it works. Everything works fine, but it doesn't go off right away. So here's what we're going to do to fix that. Pull this thing back over. Basically, I want that thing to go away no matter what. I want to destroy that thing whether anytime I hit that E key on my keyboard, I want it to go away. So the way we're going to fix that is we're going to wire both ends of that equation into it. So your destroy component is centered right here. If the light is off, destroy it. If the light is on, destroy it. It doesn't really matter. Whenever I hit the E key, I want it destroyed. So my destroy component is wired to both of my options in here, and I'm going to save that and compile it. And now what happens is when I go back out to play it, it comes on, and as soon as I hit E, it goes off. And it never comes back on. If I turn around and go back this way and then cycle back, and step into the trigger. It doesn't come back on, but I know I have to hit E for it to work. So sorry for that confusion there, but sometimes the best laid plans don't always work out the way you want. So just make sure that you have, in this particular case, that thing wired up. Now, if you don't want to do that text, don't worry about the text. That's just a nice feature in there so you understand how to make text appear. There is text that we can use, and we'll do this later on in the semester, that you can actually have text appear on the side of the screen, kind of like where your frame rate goes and things like that. The only problem with communicating that way with the player is that they're focusing on what is in front of them. You're focusing on what is in front of you, and then over there on the left you can see it says lighting needs to be rebuilt. It would be a small type that would run along the left-hand side of the screen over there, and if you're trying to do something, that's really not what, if I'm looking at that light, I'm not really noticing the fact that over here on the left side of the screen would be, over here would be a little thing telling me what to do. So it's much better to actually have the text there, and this is kind of how we do that. We just go in, add in that. It's set up, it's ready to go. It tells me what to do. As soon as I hit E to turn that light on, it works. Now, if I don't do that, if I come over here and I go this way and then back up, it goes away, come in. Until I actually hit that E key, it's going to keep telling me what it is to do, I need to do. So now if I hit the E key, it goes on, goes away, and now it assumes that I now know how to turn lights on and off, and we can go from there. Now if you want to add that into your door, you can do the same thing. If you would like to change the keys for those, you can change the key. If you want to use L for lighting and D for door, whatever it is that you would like to have it set up, and then you can just tell the player what it is they're supposed to do. And you only have to do it once. You don't have to do it for every door. You can just do it on one particular door. And then you have that option. Now that you understand, basically, through these two videos, how these kind of work and how you can go back in and use your construction to maybe set some visibility and add some elements in out over here, what you can do is you can go back and create a door that has some additional information in through here using the same things that we're doing. Okay, where you can go in and you can then say, look, why don't I create a light property here, and I can turn these elements on, and what I can do is I can say, oh, look, on a door, don't bother showing the information on how to open up the door, and I can uncheck that and turn it off. And then for the first door it works, and then for every door from there on in, it doesn't have to be displayed. You can set it up that way, and it works exactly the same way when you're building all of these nodes for all these blueprints. We've used in these two videos a lot of the same nodes. So you can mix and match to make these things work and get them to do what you need to do. If you need additional help on these, you can search the web for information on blueprints, both the Unreal Engine, and there are a lot of people out there who produce videos that can get you through things. If you're looking for a specific technique and you're not getting it either through the book that you're using or you're not getting it through the videos I'm providing, then just go into and Google Unreal Engine 4 and Blueprint and then the specific topic you're looking for, and you'll find somebody out there who has a video that will teach you how to do that specific thing, or you'll find something in one of the groups. They'll kind of walk you through it, and you'll be able to figure out exactly what to do from there. So I hope this helps. Next video we're going to be doing is how to open up a door using a key. We're going to manufacture a key actually here in Blueprint. We're going to build a model, and then we're going to place it in our scene, and we're going to make it so the door won't open until you have picked up the key and added it into your inventory. And that's going to mean not only do we have to work a blueprint like this, we're also going to have to go back. I'm going to close that down. We're also going to go back, and we're going to go into our third-person blueprint, our third-person character. Wait for that to open up. This is the blueprint that runs the third-person character, and what we're going to do is we're going to have to go back into here, and we're going to have to add an element into this, so the third person picks up a key, destroys the key, so the key is no longer sitting on the ground, and then the fact that it has done all of that is then registered by the door blueprint. So that's what we're going to do in our next video.